Awesome. Well, welcome back. This is our fourth and final session of this workshop, and I want to thank all of you for joining me for this, and without you, these don't happen. So it's been a long time since I've done this, and it felt really good. So thank you for joining in. Today, I've got several things that I want to go over, but to start with, if you're interested, I am strongly considering a new workshop or two starting in February, and I've kind of tweaked the dates a little bit. I sent out a few feelers just to get an idea of where people might be able to fit this into their schedule if you're interested, but it looks like February 26th, March 5th, 12th, and 19th are possibilities, and I have to coordinate with the school, but it's never been an issue there. Especially with Saturday, it seems to work really well. So if you are interested, this is just a you're not committed to it, but I have a sign-up sheet up here if you're interested. And if you have a preference for morning and afternoon, I'm hoping that I can do what I'm doing this time so that if you miss a class, you can make it up the next week by doing 2 classes, something like that. So anyway, if you're interested, looking at watercolor, certainly, and possibly acrylics, although with the 2 sessions, the watercolor worked really well for people that wanted to make it up. They weren't coming into an acrylic class when they had signed up for watercolor. So it'll most likely be watercolor. So if you're interested, when you get a chance, sign up there. A couple of other quick things here. Most of you are close to the completion of the still life. And so for a follow-up, just to kind of send you off for the next month or so, or the next 3 weeks. What I'm going to do for the demo today is basically a symmetrical design. This is a very simple mandala, and what a mandala is a symmetrical map or design of the universe that some cultures have used as a method or a tool for meditation. So the reason I've used mandalas is, first of all, I love looking at them, and you can find lots of, if you haven't researched mandalas or you want to do more research with them, this is the Dover publication, Nature Mandalas. It's a coloring book, and it's pretty simple, but it's got, gives you the idea, it gives you lots of possibilities. The other place that's really quick and easy to find ideas to start with is just look online for mandala coloring pages, and you'll find lots of options. There are other books. I have another one at home that's much more fine art oriented and a lot, I guess, not as simplistic as these designs. So you can take it as far, any direction that you want to go. What I would suggest with the mandala is that you pick a theme. And you'll notice that on a lot of the examples. There'll be symmetry and repetition. Maybe pick a couple of things that kind of tie together. For example, if you did fishing, let me do that one because that'll work well for me explaining it. You might do a trout in the center. You might do fly patterns in the middle, and then on the outer edge, you could do something that would relate to that would have to do with equipment like fly reels or creels or rods, whatever you wanted to do. So pick a topic and kind of think of like 3 levels. Think of it as a bullseye as a good way to start. So kind of sketched in a bullseye up there. The thing that really works well with this is if you do the mandala and you're doing a pour, like I'm going to demonstrate today, you're actually dealing with the bullseye or the 3 levels with the drawing or the graphics and also with the color. So it'll all kind of tie together. So I'll explain more of that when I do the demo a little bit later, but that's kind of today's plan. And when we do this, I'm going to talk a little bit about doing drop shadows. So I have masked off the main graphics on this mandala design with masking fluid. What I'm going to do after I do the pour and after the sheen has come off of the illustration board, I'm going to take a brush and do some drop shadows just to accentuate and get these objects to kind of pop. So I'll be demonstrating how to do drop shadows and then a couple of texture effects. I know lots of you have done things like using salt. We can spritz. You could use a sponge. You could flick water. There's lots of ways to get some texture going if you're interested in that. So anyway, I'll be covering all of those things. So that's the plan for the demo today. A couple of other things. If you are interested in converting a photo in your art to a line drawing and you have access to Photoshop, Adobe Photoshop, I jotted down how to get there. What you do is open up your photo, right click, and it'll say open with, and then choose, if you have Photoshop on your device, click on Adobe Photoshop. The image will come up in Photoshop, and then what you do is up on the top bar, go to filters, click on filters, and there'll be a whole bunch of choices. Go to sketch. When you click on sketch, it'll give you a whole bunch of choices, and then click on photocopy. And as soon as you click on that, oh, one other thing before you do this, make a duplicate. Copy the image. Otherwise, your original will be turned into this line drawing. So when you open it up in Photoshop, the first thing to do is go to Image, I believe it is, and do Duplicate. And it'll just make a copy for you. Then you'll have the original and you'll have a line version. So anyway, once you open it up, Filters, Sketch, and Photocopy. Did I miss anything, Val, that you can think of with those steps?
Yeah, invert. Okay. Yeah, inverted.
Oh yes, that very important. If you're going to use the tracing paper, there's one other step. Is when after you do this, you've got it turned into a line drawing. It's there for you. Go back and go into Image again, and go to Image Rotation, I believe is what it's called, and just do a horizontal flick, and it'll just take that line and flip it over for you, so you don't have to do. It'll save you a step with the tracing paper.
And
what did you call it? Image?
To
rotation?
Yeah, go to Image Rotation, I believe is what it's called. So while we're on that topic, in my website, which is www.kenmcgowanart.com, I am posting Val's work with the videos. So the first one is in there now, and Val has finished the third version, which I haven't, or the third session, which I haven't posted there yet, and then we'll have today's. So we'll have 3 of the 4 sessions that we did for this class on my website if you're interested in that. And we're working on getting a YouTube channel also, so you can access it there. And all of these things that we're going over, like this whole thing with the Adobe Photoshop line conversion, we'll have those steps at some point in there so that you will be able to, you won't have to try to remember this. There'll be a demo of how to do it.
That'll be this video.
On this video. Awesome. So that's what we're working on. And then in the little highlight box there, if you are concerned about your painting being affected by UV light and fading over time, the solution to that is to buy a can of spray varnish. And I buy the satin. You can buy matte, which is kind of the flat, or you can buy gloss. In between is satin, which is what I use. Give your painting a very light coat with the spray varnish. You know, I use the Golden and the Liquitex brands. I've used both and had good luck with both of those. One caution is with black. Sometimes you will see some little speckles happen. Don't panic when that happens. Give it some time. What I've done before is I panicked and tried to rub it out immediately. Then you might have a problem. So if it speckles a little bit, you know, what I would do is go to a well-ventilated spot, hold your painting up. I usually just hold it in my hand. Start the spray before you hit the actual image. In other words, spray into the air and then draw it across. And just give it a light coat. Let it dry for half an hour, 45 minutes. Maybe turn it the different orientation, different direction, and do the same thing. Do that several times, and it will build up a varnish coating, which will protect your painting over time. If you don't want to do that, the other solution to this is replace the regular glass with some UV blocking glass. And I've been looking around online. There are lots of suppliers that you can order from. I just haven't decided which one I want to go with. They also make the UV blocking plexiglass, which is light, shatterproof, it's a lot easier if you're gonna, it's lighter. So when you're hanging the painting, or if you're gonna ship it as a gift or something like that, plexiglass is the way to go because it's lighter and it won't shatter. And they do make UV blocking plexiglass. So those are other options. And again, this particular frame is just a pre-made frame from Michaels, and Hobby Lobby carries something very similar. This comes with the backing that has the wire hookup, so you can go this direction for landscape. It also has the other orientation, so you can go portrait direction with it. And it's just that super simple method where you just open it up with these little clips. This works great for the thin 140-pound watercolor paper because it's thin enough to fit in there. This would not work with this particular frame with the illustration board. It's just too thick. And actually, it probably wouldn't work well with heavier, like 300-pound weight paper. So I would say best bet with this is to use watercolor paper and use the thinner 140-pound weight paper, or even lighter if you were comfortable with that. And then I just get my own wire, and that's all there is to it. Very simple. Any questions about that or anything else that we've covered in the class? If not, let's do a quick critique, and then we'll do a demo, and then let you guys get painting. Join me up here in this. If you're thinking about the next workshop, this is probably going to be a major part of it. So if you are thinking about signing up for another one, come on up, or if you're just interested in pour, come on up and I'll show you a small technique for pouring. So with a pour, you really have to kind of give up your control. You have to just give it up to the watercolors. You do have some options for sure, and there are some things that I've learned about pouring, but again, a lot of it is going to be random. It's going to be influenced by what you're working on. So I'm working on the Crescent cold pressed illustration board. You can certainly do this on watercolor paper. It works great. You're going to get your paper very, very wet, so you're going to want to have it stapled or taped down or clipped down to avoid lots and lots of wrinkling. And again, the other thing that's going to influence this pour is the amount of masking that I have on here. So you're going to get pooling, and that's fine. I mean, that's all part of the deal. So a couple of ways you can do this. You can use just a tub, something to catch the water and the paint. You can also use these puppy training pads. You can get these. I got these at Walmart, and I'll show you the packaging, but they just absorb water. So however you want to do it, I think I'll use the tub like this first. So to prepare for this, what I've done is I took a yellow, red, and blue setup with color. So this is quinacridone gold, which it looks like a sienna brown, as you guys know, but when you pour it on there, it's going to turn golden. I've got a mix. This has some alizarin crimson, which we use for the black, and then a little bit of another red. This was the quinacridone red. You can use any colors you want. It doesn't even have to just be the primary colors. That's what I'm going to do because I think it's a great way to learn about pouring. And then for the blue, I've learned the hard way that if you use something like Prussian blue, you have to use it very cautiously, and you probably want to dilute it quite a bit. Cerulean blue is a lot lighter, more sky blue. I think it's more forgiving and less dominant than darker blue. You can try, you may experiment. There's ultramarine blue would be interesting. You could even, I have done some pouring with indigo blue, but I was cautious with that. It was mostly indigo blue on the painting. I wasn't trying to do primary colors. So just a word of caution, some of the blues can overpower everything. So basically what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use the bullseye. So I'm going to wet the paper. Does this work better? I'm learning. So with the paper, I'm going to wet the whole thing. So it's going to be wet on wet. And I'm going to pour the yellow roughly where the line is on the bullseye. I don't have it drawn here. But I'm not going to pour the yellow directly in the center. I'm going to leave the center white, and it will fill in because the water is on the board, will be on the board. That yellow or the gold is going to fill in. So I'm going to pour a circle of gold and let that do its thing for a moment. And then I'm going to use this outer circle to pour the red and let that work its way around and blend with the gold. And then I'm going to drop in the blue in the corners. So that's kind of the plan. And again, this is a watercolor, a very loose watercolor idea, so you have to give up some control. So my board is completely dry right now. I have taped off with painter's tape the edges because also I've learned the hard way, and I had some students that had some very bad experiences with delaminating. The top level can come off if you soak this without any tape on the edges, and that was.
What kind of color did you use on those figures?
This is just the masking fluid.
Oh, okay.
And what happened with the one, this is kind of interesting. I'm not sure if that's what you were noticing, Kathleen, but I had a brush that had some pigment in it. So it mixed with the yellow that's in this.
I didn't notice
plus
that.
A little bit of dirty, muddy color of some kind, but it'll be fine. It'll come right off of there. So this is just the masking fluid. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to spritz this. Liberally. And I want to work this into the surface of the board, the illustration board. So I'm just going to take a 1-inch brush, and I'm just going to work this water into the paper that's mounted on the backing, which is basically what this illustration board is. And you just kind of want to, spend a moment really kind of working this in. So I'm going different directions. It's pretty wet. And that's prepared. That's basically all you're going to need to do for your pour. Now, if you're working with paper, it might take it may absorb more than this board is doing, so you might give it another minute or so just to work into the fibers inside the sizing of the paper. Okay, so now the fun part, and now give up your control. So I've just mixed up a little bit of quinacridone gold. There are a lot of really good YouTube videos about pouring with watercolor. So if you want to follow up on this, check out some of them. I watched a guy who was pouring completely with nothing but the Payne's Gray. But what he did with it was he mixed up 3 different concentrations. So one was very thin. These are pretty thin that I'm using. One was much heavier. And one was unbelievably heavy. It almost looked like acrylic paints. And when he came back to it later, I believe it was the next day, it was still tacky. That's how thick it was. But he was doing kind of an abstract idea, and it worked out really well, but got me to thinking about, the concentration of the paint is another factor to consider. Okay, so again, I'm going to try to do this inner circle, and I'm going to kind of just try to control this a little bit, but I know that I won't be able to, and that's okay. Now, at this point, you can do what's called a controlled wash, and controlled is sort of take that with a grain of salt. Yeah. But this is where you get to play around with watercolors. You can see the kind of the damming that's happening with the masking fluid. So you kind of have to work with that.
Boy, that little bit goes a long way.
It's amazing how concentrated these good watercolors are. It's amazing.
That's pretty.
And again, this is where you want some kind of a container, because at some point you're probably going to end up wanting some of this to drip off the edge to kind of stop this gold concentration here.
I guess for a little bit of control, I've seen videos where they've used their finger
Yes.
to move things in a direction.
Yes. And that's a good point. Well, you could use your hands. You'll see artists that, move it around with your hands. You can also use a brush. I mean, there's no rule or law that says you can't. I'm going to kind of just let the colors, try to do a controlled wash with this way. But yeah, that's definitely a good point. You will find videos where the artists are moving it around with their hands. And so you do whatever you are liking with this wash. And just for fun now, I'm going to go ahead and go to the red. So with the red, I'm going to kind of follow that circle that I sketched. There's a lot of white spots, so maybe that's where I'm going to kind of start with this. But what I want to see happen is gold and red blending and creating some more colors. And you do have to be cautious with the red too, because it's powerful. And I didn't control it really well. I got a whole bunch on the one side, more to the left there, but let's just see what happens here. So I'm going to go ahead, and there's a lot of pigment on here. I'm going to go ahead and drip off some of this.
What do you do with that down in there? Do you pipe it up?
You
lay it
could,
down?
that's a really good question. You could actually have fun with this. Jenny gave me that hot press paper. You could actually take the paper and just create another abstract. Just press it on to maybe wet it first. Okay, so you can kind of see how where the paper was white, you're getting more of this pink color. Where the paper was stained, because remember, whatever color you pour on there first stains the paper. You have the gold staining, and so now you're going to get the red interacting with that gold that you stained the paper with initially. And I'm kind of wanting to leave some whites because that might be where the blue goes. And then the blue will also go into the red and gold. So you should get some violets or lavenders. You should probably be able to get some aquas, possibly, if we have some spots where it's just mostly gold with the blue. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to go ahead and take the cerulean blue and drop some of that in. My board is drying a little bit, but it's still wet enough to work here. Interestingly, that blue was very thin. I was really cautious with it. So at this point, I'm going to actually drop in a little bit of a stronger blue.
What's that?
This one is ultramarine. So let's drop a little bit of this in. And this kind of goes into the drop shadow technique anyway. So I want to kind of accent these graphics, the birds here. By getting some blue behind those. Okay, and now I'm going to spritz this a little bit, and just two things are probably going to happen. As the sheen comes off of this, when I spritz it, it's going to create texture. But I'm not so concerned about that right now. I actually just want to move this pigment. So I'm going to spritz and kind of get this moving around. And when I took the workshop with the painter Soon Warren, she was very big on this kind of stuff. She actually came by while I was painting and said, you need to start moving that stuff around. And this is what she did. And just to get those colors to kind of start moving together.
she in Springs?
She's in Dallas, is where
Oh.
she's based, I think. I know she's got a gallery representation down there. I'm pretty sure it's in Dallas area is where she lives. But she does, she judges shows all over the place. Okay, so I'm going to spritz a little bit more. Now at this point, I kind of want to see what's happening with textures. So let's, I'm going to hold it a little bit away from it and just let it kind of start to do its thing. It's really too wet right now. This is really interesting. When it's too wet, what's going to happen is these textures will appear and then they will blend together and kind of dissipate and disappear. But you kind of get the idea of how this is going to work.
Mm-hmm.
And now the other thing that we can do, when the sheen is coming off of your paper or your board, you can, if you want to do salt, that's the time to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to take a little bit of salt. What's that?
Everybody's favorite.
Yes, yeah. And then, different kinds of salt will create different effects. So you might try coarse and fine, and I've had a few people that say you have to use certain types, like kosher salt. But what I'm looking for, just places, usually where it's raised up a little bit, you will see that it's starting to dry.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just going to drizzle in some salt. I'm just going to kind of let that start that way. And in the meantime, I want to do a little bit more drop shadowing. So I'm going to be bold here. I'm going to pick up some, let's go with indigo mixed with Payne's gray. This is going to be really powerful. But I'm going to drop some of this behind the birds here since it's further away from my light source or the kind of the center of the mandala. So I'm just kind of creating a drop shadow, and that's the nice thing about having the masking fluid is you don't have to be careful at all. And let's do the same on the opposite side here.
What would you consider the source of light? Like the middle?
Yeah, I would say kind of the middle of the bullseye. Yeah. Yeah. I've always loved symmetry in art. So this is the kind of design that I kind of enjoy working with. And again, with this, you can kind of, manipulate it. Work that around a little bit. And you could do drop shadows elsewhere too, maybe with colors that aren't quite so bold. Now, that dark color that we just did, the indigo and the Payne's gray, it's kind of holding a definite line in spots. And if you want to disperse that, you can. You might get some blossoms happening with your paint if you add a lot of water with the brush. It might push the pigment apart and create some blooms or blossoms, and that's okay. That's not a bad thing, but just be aware of that.
Mm-hmm. So you don't want a lot of water.
You probably don't want a lot of just pure water mixed into it. Yeah. Okay, I picked up a little bit of a lighter blue now. This is called French ultramarine. So it's still a version of ultramarine, but a little bit different. I'm just going to do a little bit more with this drop shadow and try to get it to spread a little bit more. And now behind the flower, I'm going to pick up, I'm going to go with that Tuscan red and maybe a little bit of a dark color. Let's say Payne's gray with Tuscan red makes a nice dark brown. Let's go with that. So just under some of these petals, I'm going to throw in a drop shadow here. Thank you, Kathleen.
Maybe because it is dry, it's going to have to take it.
And you could do the same under the insects if you wanted to. And that's kind of the base coat to the mandala. I mean, you can go as far as you want. I think you could easily overwork this. But enjoy, these kind of things that start happening. I love some of the mixtures and textures. And you can now accentuate the idea with the, if you want to do salt, now is when it's really going to start getting good. Because the sheen is starting to come off. Like these areas are perfect for it.
Oh, yeah, I see that.
It's too wet here still, but
Yeah.
that's the thing with this technique is you just kind of have to take your time and watch it. And then just be patient. Just go get a cup of coffee, go have a snack, and come back and see what's happening. I already am liking some of the textures that are appearing there.
It's so neat.
And again, remember that the color will lighten as it dries, so it's not going to be quite this intense. It looks, it's pretty strong, but it will dissipate and lighten just a little bit as it dries. And then the next step after you're finished with this step of the painting, depending on whether you want to come back in and do more work around the background, which I probably won't do much. After this is completely dry, later in the session, we can remove the masking fluid, and then you can paint a base layer. Right, what you're going to have right now are silhouettes. There's going to be white silhouettes, and then you can decide, okay, I want to color this element, or maybe you want these to be negative spaces where the shapes look like sky or empty space, and that would be interesting. And the other technique or the other material are the colored pencils. So now after this dries and after we decide if we're doing a base coat, on the area that's been masked off, then you can come back in with colored pencil and create a whole other type of texture with the colored pencil. So I'll demonstrate that a little bit later today too.
How long does it take to dry?
This will dry pretty quick. I would say there may still be a little bit of moisture inside the board, but I'd say you could work with this and remove the masking fluid within 45 minutes to an hour. And if you wanted to speed it up, you could dry it.
It's faster than I thought.
Yeah, I think it'll dry pretty quickly. The places that are, you can see the water pooling in some places. I don't want to tip it a whole lot now because I kind of want what's happening to continue to happen with the salt.
Wow.
But I have done, I'll show you in a minute, I have done pours where you do the salt and then tip it, and the textures will run. So you can create interesting effects that way too.
Do you possibly have any bad effects by speeding up your drying process by using a hair dryer? Or
I think it
does
could
it matter at all?
I do think it does matter. I think that you probably want to, if you're doing salt, for example, I would let it kind of do its thing for quite a while before you start in with the dryer. The dryer is probably when everything is pretty well established the way that you want it to be, then you can just go ahead and kind of get into the deeper layers of this. I think if you were doing it right now, it might stop. These salt crystals will still continue to dissolve, and what they're doing is they're going to push the pigment away. So if you stop that right now, it would definitely not have as much effect as these did.
Now, this painting has a top and a bottom.
Yes.
Of the,
Yes.
If you were, do you normally dry, a mandala? Well, this one, because it's sort of it's a little different than the circle,
Right. Yes, it's rectangular.
If you were to let it dry and let gravity work with you, you think it's worth?
I think it's good to be aware of that as a possibility if you wanted to do that, because with gravity, you could it'll do things with the drop shadows. The gravity also could do things with the salt. You could also, this is, let me point out a couple little things that are happening around here. Well, I have a little bit of a bloom
yeah.
right there. Yeah. But if you were to tip this now, these areas would run a little bit, creating other effects. So I think that's a good thing to keep in mind, is just knowing that gravity and control, you still are kind of dealing with a controlled wash at this point with this pour. So you could manipulate it and let gravity do some effects, create some effects with it. I think what I would do at this point is let this dry, and then I think I would come back with the paints and probably punch up some of these drop shadows, because they're going to dissipate. They're going to be less, already this has changed quite a bit over here especially. I think I would come back, or if you don't want to go that route and you're working on an illustration board, you could do the same thing with colored pencils. That would work really well.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so for the colored pencil, I've used these for years, the Barrel Prismacolors. I've tried other ones. I've tried top end, really good quality colored pencils. These are my favorites. They're softer than some of the ones that I've used, and they'll pick up the tooth on this board really, really well. So this is where we've ended up with the background, with the pour, with the mandala, and the salt, and the blooms, and just the interaction of the colors have kind of done their thing. It's powerful. If you don't want this strong of a background, the way to alleviate the intensity is just dilute the paint, thin it down more. So at this point, you want to make sure that the board is dry, and this is mostly dry. I can feel a little bit of dampness in here, but I don't think it's going to affect the masking fluid. So I'm going to go ahead and take the mask off. And again, I'm just using my fingers. You can use these. This is a rubber cement pickup. Thing about these, they get dirty, and I don't think they're really necessary. I don't use this very often. If you had a lot of masking, you wanted to work quicker, maybe, but I always just enjoy this whole ritual of getting this off of here. And then a lot of times, once you get it started, if you applied it thickly, it'll just lift up like this. And I'm going to go ahead and remove the mask off of these birds also.
There is something satisfying about that, isn't there?
Yes.
It's like Elmer's glue off of your hands when you were a kid.
Yep. Very true. Okay, so that worked pretty well. You'll always find a few spots where you may not have applied it exactly where you wanted it, but now we can make some changes. So at this point, what you want to ask yourself is, what do you want to do with these images? Do you want these to stay as silhouettes? Do you want them to be realistic birds? Because I'm kind of using these in a design mode, a couple of options would be just paint something like, for example, clouds in here, mostly white with a little bit of blue, and just keep these as design elements. So what I'm saying is that the way that I started, I started painting, and I love to draw. So at a certain point in time, I was working with illustration board using colored pencils a lot, and I remembered back to using watercolors in the past, and I knew that watercolors would work on the illustration board, but when you put the base down with the watercolor and then go to the colored pencil, as opposed to just using colored pencil, it'll speed up your process tremendously, because you don't have to build up all of this color on the board with pencil. It's already stained with the watercolors. So let me take, this is indigo blue. And it's just a good, rich, strong blue. If you're doing this technique, do it on illustration board, not on watercolor paper, and keep your pencils sharp. Get a good sharpener, because it makes all the difference, because this is what's going to pick up the tooth of the board. So I'm going to get down in here And I'll hold this up after I get going. But basically what you do is just work with this like you would normally work with colored pencil. But again, the fact that you've stained the paper or the board with the watercolor is going to speed this process up. It's still not a fast process, but it will speed it up. And you can go right over, you know, whatever you've got going on with the watercolor. So I've got this salt texture. And by the way, with the salt on your board, you may find some that hasn't dissolved. Just rub it off. And you can layer colors. So let me grab something different here. Here's a little bit of a lavender. This is the type of violet. And actually, I'm just going to go over this blue with a little bit of purplish. And it's subtle, but you can see that little bit of purple showing up there. And this is interesting, where the salt has pushed the pigment away, this lavender is going to show up in the white spots better. So you can actually develop some really beautiful effects with this. So there's a little example of how that kind of works.
Wow, that's pretty.
That really makes it pop.
Yeah, that, you know, let's do something different just to demonstrate that. I'm going to grab, this was a pink. I think this will really bring out these lights in here, so I'm going to go over this with a little bit of pink. So it's not destroying or getting rid of the textures with the watercolor, it's just kind of enhancing them. And, you know, over here we can get into yellow oranges and yellow ochre. So this should be a nice color. Doesn't show a lot, but it really will make a difference if you spend the time doing this. And Lou had asked me an interesting question when I stopped by. And the question was, are you going to leave this circular design in the mandala? And this is a time when you could do that. It's up to you. Let me do a little bit of that just to show. This is one of my favorites. Crimson Lake. It's just kind of a rich brick color. Let's take a little bit of that and just develop this circle.
Crimson what?
Crimson Lake.
Lake.
Yep. So I'm just going to kind of darken the edge of that line and then blend it out.
It's almost like you do negative painting.
Yep.
So you're gonna keep the bullseye then?
Yeah, I'm going to kind of develop it, get it to pop a little bit here. You know, with shading techniques, when I teach drawing, there's a lot of different techniques. You've got hatch and cross hatch. So hatch, you know, go one direction, pick up the tooth. Cross hatch, you go the other way and you'll pick up more of the tooth. Another one is the figure 8. You just kind of do this, or sort of the circular motion. So experiment with different, by going different directions and keeping your pencil sharp, you're going to pick up different tooth on the board, and that will just make your shading more uniform, and you'll pick up more of the tooth on the board. Now, one bit of warning. I've learned the hard way. If you press and press and press, you will actually get rid of the tooth and you'll get a real glossy look to the board. So if you want to avoid that, don't go crazy with the shading. Just a light touch works. But you can see that will very quickly pick that up.
That'll be nice.
And you could go, if you went with a darker color now, you could really get it to pop, or you could stop however much you want to develop that circle. And you could even let it fade in and out. You could do some shading here and let it sort of disappear, maybe pick it up again over here. So there's tons of options. For example, if you really liked this and you didn't want to get it too dark, you might go darker down here, but kind of leave that yellow alone. You can't paint on top of this, and you can't lift anymore. So this is almost like you're putting a varnish on there because it's going to seal this off. So once you start with the colored pencil, that area is really not going to be paintable. You can't paint that anymore. So just be aware that that's pretty much this is the last medium that you'll be using on that section. You can still work it with colored pencil, but you can't work it with paint.
No water either.
What's that?
No water?
No, because this will just resist it, Lou. This has got a very waxy final feel to it. So this is a lot of fun. And in the next workshop, this will be an option. So if you're interested in this, get some illustration board. If you'd rather just paint, that's perfectly fine too. So.
You lean towards secondary colors, so you kind of skew it toward the purple and the orange rather than the primary.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it because we poured with the primaries. So now, I wasn't really thinking about that, but that's true. I'm using the secondary colors. So by mixing two primaries, if you mix red and yellow, you get orange. So you've got two primaries creating a secondary color. So I was looking for a yellow orange, and they make them. I just have to find them. Yeah. So here's a yellow orange. It's not sharpened up yet, but that would be perfect as a way to kind of bridge the gap between the two primary colors. But there are so many with the Prismacolors. They make so many colors, and you can buy these open stock, so you don't have to buy a whole set. As a matter of fact, I have favorite colors that I buy by the dozen. This sand, this is white, but sand, this color right here, I've used this so much that I bought these by the dozen. So you can, like a Dick Blick or lots of other places, you can buy the, I'm sure other brands do it too, but you can buy the Barrel Prismacolors open stock. So you just pick the color. You don't have to buy a set. They make 12 color, 24, 36. They make, huge sets. But you'll find out of those, you'll probably have a dozen that are your favorite colors. Then you can just go in and buy those individually.
Ken, what are you thinking you're going to do with the flower and the insect?
With the flower, I'm going to go with a darker center, almost the Tuscan red, maybe even darker than this. And then I'm going to do a yellow. And then with these, I'm going to wet this again after I remove the masking fluid and just drop green into it and let the green do some wet on wet runs.
Oh, how fun.
And if you're interested, if you want to paint on your project, it won't hurt my feelings at all. But I'm going to go ahead and do a little bit of this real quickly.
Well, you're going to have that. You're
Since
going to have
you
it
asked.
on a show, aren't you? So I can watch it on that.
Yes.
What are you thinking about the insects?
I better go.
Are you?
I'll probably do those fairly realistically is what I'm thinking. I'm thinking like a lavender, blue violet maybe on the dragonfly. And then with the bee, get some yellows and blacks going. Just try to get them to really kind of pop.
The naming conventions for colored pencils, they don't follow the watercolor paint.
No.
Okay.
Some of them overlap, blue like that. The first one, the indigo blue, of course, you'll find some of them do match, but there are colors that you won't find in watercolor here and vice versa. Like I've never seen anything quinacridone or anything like that with colored pencils.
And that's my kitty over there.
Oh, I see.
So I just went ahead and just removed the masking fluid, rub off any salt that's right around the area that you're working, and now I'm just going to paint like I normally would right on the illustration board.
I think so. Yeah. Yeah, they're expressive too.
So this truly is mixed media. I'm going to wet this center portion, pick up that Tuscan red. So I'm going to pick up a little bit of that Tuscan red, a little bit of the Payne's gray, maybe even a little red, and just drop it into here. Got a little spot right here. Pick that up. And I think I want a little bit more color in this. So I'm just dropping in some red. And I'm just going to let this be lighter at the top. And then for the leaves and the stem here, I'm just going to wet it. Got a little bit out of the line there, so I'm going to dry it. So that's probably the most time-consuming step. You're going wet on wet, so I just wet the board, pick up a green, or mix a green, either way. I'm dealing with, this is Hooker's green, this is Viridian. They both will work. And I'm just going to drop in some green now. And the pigment will follow the water. So you can brush it in, or you can also just let gravity kind of pull it along. Now we'll kind of let the watercolors be watercolors and do what they want to do. You know, leaving a little bit of a highlight. You can always buff that out a little bit with the colored pencils later. So I'm actually going to leave some of the white board revealed, not covering everything with pigment. And maybe a little yellow on that stem, especially up here, would be a good thing. Okay, so where I said I was going to leave it white, I'm actually going to, I just got the feeling that some yellow is going to be good in there, so I'm going to drop in some yellow. So a lot of times in painting, that's what happens as you go. You just, you feel it. Yeah, you know what it needs.
And it did need that.
Yeah, I think that made it more interesting. And you'll still have the chance to, you can do tons of detail on these with colored pencil or not. It's totally up to you. And now I'm going to do some yellow here. I think I'm going to work from yellow into white because I don't want to touch that purple with the yellow or I will instantly have mud. So I'm just going to kind of drop in some yellow, maybe yellow green, but kind of leave the center white for now. And I can always come back or use colored pencil to do more work there if I want to. And again, as I'm working here, you can make lots of adjustments with this. You don't have to do all this right now, but at this point, I'm just going to go to the next, go on the analogous part of the color wheel from the yellow over into oranges or reds or golds. So quinacridone would probably be great. New Gamboge is very similar to quinacridone gold. I'm just going to drop a little bit of color to the outer points on these petals. I'm going to darken it just a touch more. I don't want it to look exactly like the background, but I do want it to sort of blend in with the background, and I can punch up the background with colored pencil later. So I put some Tuscan red. It was too close to the background, so I just diluted it a little bit, and it immediately lifted it off right there. And I'm going to soften this edge right here, but not touch the plum color in the center yet. Yeah, I'm much happier just with that little bit of blending, so it's just not such a stark yellow against that. So that's kind of the idea of this technique. And now as this dries, I will probably come back in and start to do the details on the leaves and take it as far as you want or leave it more like this. So that's,
I love the color.
it's got some vibrant colors.
Yeah.